I recently did a full deep dive into nuclear energy, the myths behind it, and if it could be a plausible solution to climate change, and also how it might meet the energy needs of the future, and you can check it out in full right here. But I barely covered the other forms of green energy in that video, so I wanted to compare them head to head, so that's what we're doing today. Which form of green energy is the best? Let's get into it. It's gonna be a long one. Hello everyone, it's Emma, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all sorts of things, zero waste, focusing on free, easy, and fun ways to live low waste, and ways that we can all be activists. I'm not gonna get into every single little detail that I got into in this blog post. Oh my gosh, it's still going. For the sake of keeping this video short. So if you want more information, check out the blog post. If you want sources, check out the blog post. And if you want a full deep dive into any single one of these forms of green energy, let me know down below and I can make a full dedicated video for each one of these. Here are the categories for reviewing: efficiency, carbon footprint, land use, cost to build, safety, recycling, and ecosystem impact. A quick disclaimer, we are going to be talking about green energy, not renewable energy, not perfect energy. Lots of people really got mad at me in my nuclear video, like, that's not green energy because of nuclear waste. And it's like, solar panels also have their downsides, wind turbines also have their downsides. There's not a perfect solution, but all of these are greener than fossil fuels, and that's what's important here. And at the end, we will do a head-to-head comparison where I will actually rank all of these forms of energy against one another and against fossil fuels to see which one is the best. So let's get started with wind energy. For each form of energy, I think it's also important to talk about how it even works. So here's what the Department of Energy has to say about wind energy. It involves using wind turbines to convert the turning motion of blades pushed by moving air, kinetic energy, into electrical energy, electricity. This requires certain technologies such as a generator that sits at the top of a tower behind the blades in the head, the nacelle, of a wind turbine. Fun fact, this is not a windmill. A windmill is very similar in that it uses wind to spin, but then it mills stuff like flour. Alright, first category, efficiency. Wind energy is currently used in all 50 US states, and according to the DOE, provides the US with 10% of its energy needs. A typical 2.8 megawatt utility scale wind turbine could produce enough electricity to power just under 1,000 American homes, and wind turbines are growing taller. The bigger, the more energy that they may be able to produce. New designs for blades help wind turbines generate more power and address other issues such as material use, recyclability, and noise. According to the EPA, wind turbines are about 20 to 40% efficient at converting wind into electricity. This variation is due to how much wind is available, essentially, but this does not make it an unreliable energy source. Thanks to storage devices, the power outputs from wind turbines is pretty steady. Now, the carbon footprint. Here are some stats from Yale Climate Connections for the carbon footprint of fossil fuels that we will be using throughout this video, just to keep it consistent comparing all of these forms to fossil fuels. So Yale Climate Connections says that natural gas is 437 to 758 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour, and coal is 675 to 1689 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. Now, what is CO2 equivalent? That is basically just saying that they have calculated into this factor that there's other emissions besides carbon dioxide in our air, such as methane, for example. So this is the total emissions footprint and not necessarily just the carbon dioxide footprint. Now, as for wind, let's check out this chart to show a few options from different countries and comparing onshore versus offshore wind. Something to note here is that offshore wind has nearly double the footprint of onshore wind. That's simply just because it is double the size. As for US numbers, let's use the top of the chart from Texas. Wind energy produces a whopping 4.9 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. Yes, this includes a wind turbine's entire life cycle. So of course, the most harmful part of this life cycle is the creation of these blades and the transportation and the construction. But once it's up and running, it's nearly a footprint of 0. So it way outcompetes fossil fuels. Of course, land use is a big concern. And as with any form of green energy, they are not placed willy-nilly. They're not just going to place a wind turbine wherever the heck they want to. They do a lot of calculations, evaluation, and engineering to figure out where's the best spot to put this. While it does take a lot of land to disperse the turbines over a large area, the land between the turbines can still be used for farming, for gardening, or it's just often kept wild. Our World of Energy states that most estimates are around 2 to 40 acres per megawatt of capacity. But how much does it cost? Well, good news, the EPA estimates that each turbine can last about 20 years. And that's currently, because with proper research and development, they could last even longer. And it's also important to note that they require regular maintenance every 6 months or so. The American Nuclear Society estimates that each turbine costs about $3.5 million, while today's homeowner estimates around $1 million per turbine. So let's just simply use that as a window of 1 to 3.5 million per turbine. Turbine, debate below. But the US Energy Information Administration provides us with this chart that shows the energy efficiency since 2013 has gone up at least 74%, but prices to create wind turbines have gone down 27%. So that sounds like a win to me. They're becoming more efficient and becoming cheaper to produce. Here's one more chart from the Decarbonization Channel that demonstrates how much cheaper onshore wind is compared to any other form of energy, to include fossil fuels. So while it sounds expensive, it is the cheapest form of green energy. It's the cheapest form of any energy, even outcompeting fossil fuels. I was originally going to do cost for consumers in this analysis, because I wanted people to know like what's the best option for them. But of course, it depends where you live. So we're not going to dive into that today. Now let's move on to safety. Safety is kind of twofold. How safe is it for the workers, for the employees? What is their risk of danger? And then also, how safe is it for us? The turbines themselves are very safe. When one goes up next to your house, there is no evidence to prove that will have adverse effects on you whatsoever. But of course, the same could not be said for an oil drilling project, for example. Of course, at this time, we have to use fossil fuels to create the turbines in the first place, which isn't great, because that does contribute to carbon emissions and the safety and health of the planet and people in the process. As for the workers, they do have to worry about falls, electric shocks, burns, and working with heavy equipment. Now, people's biggest concern: what do we do with these giant pieces of machinery when they no longer work? Do they have to go to the landfill? Good news, recycling saves companies a lot of money. There is nothing but incentives to recycle. National Grid states that in theory, 96% of wind turbines can be recycled. And as they grow in popularity, so does the popularity of using recycled materials in the manufacturing process and the incentives to recycle them at the end of their life. But are they bird graveyards like Trump says? Are they killing whales, and are they causing people to buy less bacon? Yes, Trump actually said that once. First, considering that this is the lowest carbon footprint of any form of green energy, that is saving animals' lives, that is saving the planet. Just like with any energy project, green energy, fossil fuels, whichever, sites are screened for animal use via satellite and recorded data of the area. Then scientists monitor the proposed area in real time to see how it would look against historical data. There is continuous monitoring, deterrents like ultrasonic sounds to keep animals away from the blades, and blade speeds can be lowered to reduce the risk of impact. Now, every year it is estimated that 100,000 to 700,000 birds per year die from wind turbines, but this is far less from the estimated death of 4 billion birds with other causes such as fossil fuels, windows, and house cats. This Climate Portal study from 2012 puts it really well. They say that wind projects kill approximately 0.269 birds per gigawatt hour of electricity produced. Meanwhile, fossil fuels kill an estimated 5.18 birds per gigawatt hour of electricity. I'm just out here trying to find a nice little image to have in the background of my video. Trump is trying to put tariffs on wind energy, and he will not approve any solar or wind power projects. Meanwhile, he just opened an open pit coal mine in Wyoming. Let's move on to solar energy. First, how does it work? According to National Grid, solar panels are usually made from silicon or another semiconductor material. It is installed in a metal panel frame with a glass casing. When this material is exposed to photons of sunlight, very small packets of energy, it releases electrons and produces an electric charge. This photovoltaic PV charge creates an electric current, specifically direct current or DC, which is captured by the wiring and solar panels. This direct current electricity is then converted to alternating current electricity by an inverter. AC is the type of electrical current used when you plug appliances into normal wall sockets. How much does this magical energy from the sun create? The Center for Sustainable Systems estimates that solar panels are pretty effective, sitting at around 20% efficiency, but researchers have estimated that we can probably get up to 40% in the near future if it wasn't for that. Defunding research and development for solar panels and not allowing any more solar panel development. Anyway, we had a good run, folks. But what about when the sun's not shining? I get this question all the time from serious people and from trolls. And first, solar panels are placed in sunny areas. They're not going to place a solar field where I live in foggy Pacific Northwest. They're not going to do that because it makes no sense. Instead, they're going to place solar fields in Southern California, in Nevada, in Arizona. And even while solar panels won't perform at their peak, they still produce energy when it's cloudy, when it's raining, when there's any form of precipitation, and even in the shade. But what about the nighttime? Well, that's where storage batteries come into play. During excess sunlight, the panels can send all that electricity to batteries to store that energy to use at night, to use when the sun is not shining. So this is how you can still be reliant on solar energy 100% of the time, even when the sun isn't shining 100% of the time. Now, what about the carbon footprint? According to InfoLink, since they are created from coal-fired power plants, the average life cycle emissions are 820 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. Though made in a facility with green energy, solar PV systems are only 33 to 50 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. But still, it's so much higher than wind energy. Why? They're so much smaller. Well, manufacturing polysilicon, metal, and glass is extremely resource intensive, requiring temperatures of 1400 to 2000 degrees Celsius. Now, surely land use is where we get really bad when it comes to solar energy, right? Well, currently, solar only takes up about 0.5% of land use in the United States. Even county by county in the US, it's still less than 1% per county on average. Yes, even in agricultural areas. A conservative estimate for the footprint of solar development is that it takes 10 acres to produce 1 megawatt of electricity. Of course, the main concern here, as I've seen a lot in my hometown, is that solar energy is taking up our precious farmland. And yeah, that's a valid concern. But proper surveying of certain types of farmland can ensure that solar panels can just go over top of the farmland and you can still farm that land. Now, if you're farming corn and soybeans like plenty of people are in my hometown in Ohio, you can't exactly run a combine underneath of a solar panel. But if you're farming lettuce, greens, broccoli, stuff that's harvested by hand that people can walk underneath of, you can certainly still put solar panels over that farmland. And in fact, it might even be advantageous to the crops because stuff like lettuce can actually be damaged from too much sun. As well as if this is just grazing land, cows, pigs, other sorts of livestock can just go underneath the panels to graze and might even provide them a shady spot to rest during the heat of the day. Let's move into cost. This is once again very difficult to find based off of the size of the land, the company, the size of the panels, the technology, etc., etc. But this estimate from Genie Solar Energy is $12.5 million per 5 megawatt solar farm. Sound expensive? Yeah, it might be, but it has gone down drastically since 2013. Solar used to be the most expensive, no doubt, but it is now much closer competition to onshore wind and natural gas. And again, the price really comes down to silicon is expensive, metal is expensive, glass is expensive. So the benefit of using recycled materials in this process would make it all more cheaper, which we'll talk about shortly. But first, let's talk about safety. The only real concern here with people, animals, workers is really burns. They can get really hot in the sun, so if you're handling solar panels, just use proper PPE. Our World in Data estimates that there is only one solar panel related death every 50 years. It is very rare to be injured from solar panels. And of course, with safety comes down to carbon footprint. They way outcompete fossil fuels, making them safer for the overall health of the planet and us. Now bringing it back to recycling. Good news, about 75% of a solar panel is just glass, making it very easy to recycle at the end of its life. The other 25% is silicon and tech components. The aluminum frames and stands, absolutely very easy to recycle, but the other components, a little bit trickier. These other materials are highly valuable, it's just not as common to recycle them. Recycling for solar panels is done in the US, just not at a large scale. The EPA provides more information on the recycling process, how you can personally recycle your own solar panels if you have solar on your home, and finally, ecosystem impact. They do take up a large bit of land, it is true, so it could lead to ecosystem impact in that way, like if trees have to be cut down, if it destroys plants, if it kills plants because of too much shade, whatever it might be. There is that risk, of course, but because they are stationary, they are much safer for animals. I think it would be very interesting to research how these perform in desert regions when it comes to ecosystem impact. Like, will it allow more plants to grow? Does it allow animals to have safer spots to rest? Now, the main issue with solar is solar towers. Here's what they look like. I saw a couple when I lived in Nevada. They're very interesting. Big towers have mirrors on them, concentrate the light, and then shine the light down onto this circular solar field. They're very, very cool because it allows more light to hit these panels at once, allowing for more energy. This is essentially a death ray. It is so hot and so dangerous. So like if a bird flies into this death ray, they're a goner. It is far less than wind turbines with only a few thousand estimated deaths per year due to this hot solar ray, but it should not be overlooked. And of course, the risk does remain for regular solar panels as well if they get too hot and a bird lands on them, for example. All right, next, let's talk about dams. What is hydroelectricity and how does it work? According to the Energy Saving Trust, it's flowing water that passes through a narrow tunnel called a penstock. This turns the water's potential energy into kinetic energy. Water rushes through a turbine, causing it to spin, and the turbine powers a generator to produce electricity. First up, efficiency. Worldwide, about 20% of the energy worldwide comes from hydroelectricity. And in the US, it's about 10%. But what's crazy is the US is the #2 producer of hydroelectricity in the world, second to Canada. Now, why aren't we using all of that hydroelectricity? Well, we do export some of it to Canada, as well as a lot of our energy needs are not in those regions that are producing the hydroelectricity. But in theory, if we could figure out a better way to harness this energy, it has the potential to meet the needs of 28 million customers. And to top it all off, modern hydro turbines can convert as much as 90% of the available energy into electricity, making them extremely efficient. But a lot of our hydro facilities are located in the West. A lot of these regions have been faced with drought since about 1998 due to climate change. And in just the last 5 years, output has lowered by about 4.2% because of this. Let's talk carbon footprint. According to the Wisconsin Valley Improvement Company, only 2,400 of the nation's 80,000 existing dams are used to generate power. So keep in mind, #2 producer of hydroelectricity with only 2,400 dams. Installing turbines in existing dams versus building new dams presents a promising and cost-effective power source. However, in the last 10 years, the Department of Energy has spent $1.2 billion on research and development for other renewable energies like wind, solar, and geothermal, but only $10 million on hydropower. We'll talk more about this with ecosystem impact. I really personally don't think that we should be building more dams, despite how energy efficient hydroelectricity is, because of the ecosystem impact. But one more statistic from hydropower.org. They state that independent research suggests that the use of hydropower instead of fossil fuels for electricity generation has helped avoid more than 100 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the past 50 years alone. That's roughly equivalent to the total carbon footprint of the United States for 20 years. Land use gets a little bit complicated. The dam takes up space, yes, and the dam takes takes up, honestly, very little space. The turbines take up very little space. But when you flood a river, you're taking up a lot of space. If you're a numbers person, Freeing Energy states that using data from all the hydropower plants across the US, we calculate that it takes 0.265 acres of land to generate a megawatt hour of electricity. Now what about the cost? It was very difficult to find a solid number on how much it costs to build a hydropower dam, but here's a window from Energy Technology Systems Analysis Program. They state that it ranges from $1,750 per kilowatt hour to $6,250 per kilowatt hour. It depends on the size of the site, it depends on the company, it depends on like the width of the river basin. That's why we have that wide range in cost. Moving on to safety, I am just going to keep reiterating that every single form of green energy is inherently safer than fossil fuels because fossil fuels pollute so much, but hydro is a bit dangerous compared to the other forms of green energy that we have already discussed. In particular, hydroelectricity has a much larger risk to the public because you can interact with dams on a regular basis as opposed to a turbine or a solar field. If you recreate on a local river and there's a dam there, there's a risk. Same with workers. Building a dam, very dangerous. Working on turbines can be dangerous. Our World in Data estimates that there's 1 death related to dams every single year. But this also depends on the safety measures in place that the dam puts up, such as safety rails, guard nets, buoys. The end of life for a dam was kind of hard to calculate because like you can't really recycle all of the components of a dam. Any of the technological stuff inside the turbines can be recycled, of course. And good news, the main component here, water, can be recycled. It can be reused over and over again, and it is a renewable resource. When water passes through a turbine, it's literally just passing through, right? Like nothing gets added, there's no chemicals. It is just simply passing through on its way down the river to where it was originally going to go anyway. As for the full life cycle, hydroelectricity plants can last 50 to 100 years, which is one of the longest lifespans on this list. And lastly, I said this was kind of a downside to hydroelectricity, the ecosystem impact. If any animal, fish, etc. goes through a turbine, they can be subject to harm or death. I was hoping it was not that common, but these statistics aren't great. About 22% of fish and 60% of eels that go through turbines are killed. And that's just the impact of the turbine. What about flooding this entire ecosystem? This is a full topic that I could discuss in another day if there's interest, but here are a few key reasons. Particularly in the Pacific Northwest, salmon migrate upriver to spawn and die. They cannot reach ancestral spawning grounds due to dams. Thankfully, fish ladders and cannons, yes, I'm serious, fish cannons, have been implemented in a lot of dams in this region and are becoming more popular to help the fish move upstream. Of course, then when they move back downstream, which salmon usually don't, but other fish do, when they move back downstream, they do pose a 22% risk of dying in a turbine. New dam construction also means that rivers need to be flooded. This destroys river habitat. Many animals, again, like salmon, need river habitat to spawn, not a lake. Since salmon are a keystone species, this then impacts the entire food chain. And water quality is also impacted due to this now stagnant water. From toxic algae to more human-made pollutants in the water due to increased recreation, this can be a mess for water quality. This also changes the temperature of the water, which can impact aquatic animals. Next up is nuclear, and to save time, please go watch this video right here. Go watch this video about nuclear and then come back, or watch it at the end, but we will cover the statistics of nuclear at the end. It'll still be included, but for now, this is all you're gonna hear about nuclear in this video, because there's already a full video on it. So let's move on to geothermal. I kind of forgot that this existed until I looked up all the forms of green energy. I wanted to dive into this because I really didn't know how it worked. So according to the United States Department of Energy, geothermal energy is heat energy from the earth. Geothermal resources are reservoirs of hot water that just exist or are human-made at varying temperatures and depths below the earth's surface. So this works for heating and cooling. The DOE states that geothermal heat pumps, or GHPs, use the constant temperature of the shallow earth, 40 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, to provide heating and cooling solutions to buildings wherever the ground can be cost-effectively accessed to depths below seasonal temperature variations. So yes, this cannot be used everywhere, but honestly, it's such a similar story to other forms of green energy as well. But how efficient is it really? It's usually not the sole provider of energy for a home. It's supplementing what you already have, and usually what you already have is fossil fuels. The province of Manitoba states that it operates more efficiently than conventional heating and air conditioning systems. Annual energy savings from homeowners can be reduced from 30 to 70% in heating mode and 20 to 50% in cooling mode. Not only that, but they also require energy to take that energy from the earth and pump it up into your home. That requires energy as well. So it is a great method to reduce a reliance on fossil fuels, but it's not a perfectly fossil fuel free option. So honestly, I'm more inclined to call this energy conservation and less green energy. And geothermal accounts for about 0.4% of energy generated in the US. That being said, moving on to the carbon footprint, geothermal power plants emit 97% less acid rain causing sulfur compounds and about 99% less carbon dioxide than fossil fuel power plants of a similar size. The best estimates for a global average CO2 emission factor from geothermal power plants is 122 grams per kilowatt hour, and this is from a study conducted in 2002. Again, all of my sources are in the blog post for this video. So it still far outcompetes things like natural gas and fossil fuels from those numbers that I mentioned in the beginning, but it is a little bit higher than other green energy. As for land use, it's pretty small. The DOE says that geothermal geothermal power plants use less land per gigawatt hour than comparable coal, wind, and solar stations. And they don't state it, but I'm going to assume that it does take up more space than wind and hydro simply because they did not state it. And as we just covered, those two don't require a lot of land at all. As for the cost, according to the Center for Sustainable Systems at the University of Michigan, capital costs for conventional geothermal power plants in the US are approximately $2,500 per installed kilowatt of capacity. As with other forms of green energy that are hot, there is risk for heat injury when it comes to geothermal energy. As well as this is not 100% fossil fuel free, meaning that there are still some emissions when it comes to this. Of course, it is lowering emissions, but it is not fully emission free. And also, when it comes to safety, Enbridge estimates that depending on which region you're drilling in, it could increase the risk of earthquakes. So simply, energy companies just employ geologists to make sure that they are drilling in okay places. What about recycling and end of life? Not only do we need to talk about equipment here, but also all of the byproduct of all of this drilling. Some of this can be recycled, but some of it cannot. It truly is the same environmental impact as drilling for oil, for natural gas, any other form of drilling. And this byproduct can further lead to the pollution of soil, water, and air. Other than that, I really couldn't find a whole lot about the end of life of geothermal. I can assume that they repair and recycle as much as they can simply just because this is the cheapest option. Because metal and tech are highly valuable to recycle, so it would just be kind of stupid to not recycle them. But without a solid answer, this is simply my best guess. And lastly, for geothermal, the ecosystem impact. This mining does impact local wildlife as well. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service states that steam vented at the surface may contain hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, methane, and carbon dioxide. Dissolved solids discharged from geothermal stations include sulfur, chloride, silica compounds, vanadium, arsenic, mercury, nickel, and other toxic heavy metals. All of these released, if concentrated, can create localized fish and wildlife kills. And of course, these are all bad for our own health as well. Though there is some good news here, and that is that geothermal sites are generally pretty concentrated, meaning that the pollution is also concentrated as well. But what concerns me here is environmental racism, which you can learn more about in this video. But basically what environmental racism is, building facilities like these, polluting facilities in places of people of color, people living below the poverty line, companies just kind of saying like, this land, these people, they're disposable. That's what they're saying. And lastly, for ecosystem impact is that it does require a lot of water for cooling and other purposes, which can compete with other industries, as well as impact fish spawning grounds, our own need for water, and things like that. Our last form of green energy for today is biomass, which is a form of green energy that I had never heard of, but makes a lot of sense. So what is it? The U.S. Energy Information Administration states that biomass is renewable organic matter that comes from plants and animals. Biomass can be burned directly for heat or converted to liquid and gaseous fuels through various processes. This is burning wood in your wood stove for heat. This is using methane from food waste. This is how humans originally made heat and energy forever. It was the most common energy source all the way through the mid-1800s, but now only accounts for about 5% of energy use in the United States. Napier Grass estimates that it is about 70 to 90% efficient with modern systems. This means boilers and stoves in our own homes, as well as power plants. As for carbon footprint, it's not looking good, folks. Burning anything, no matter if it's a natural substance or oil, is going to pollute. The U.S. Energy Information Administration tells us that wood smoke contains harmful pollutants, such as carbon monoxide and particulate matter. Modern wood-burning stoves, pellet stoves, and fireplace inserts can reduce particulates released from wood burning. Similarly, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory states that burning biomass releases about the same amount of carbon dioxide as burning fossil fuels. Yikes. But the difference here is that fossil fuels releases emissions that were captured by plants millions of years ago. So this is essentially releasing new carbon dioxide into the air. But biomass, on the other hand, releases carbon dioxide that is largely balanced by the carbon dioxide captured by its own growth. So when a tree grows, it captures carbon dioxide, and when that tree is burned, it releases that exact same amount of carbon dioxide. Why burning fossil fuels is such a problem is because those plants that died millions and billions of years ago captured that carbon millions and billions of years ago, and we are once again releasing it into the atmosphere, creating an influx of carbon dioxide. And that is why essentially fossil fuels are so extremely bad. So yes, biomass still pollutes, it still creates carbon dioxide, but it is far less carbon dioxide than fossil fuels. Of course, there would be an increase to this carbon footprint if land was totally cleared and cut down and deforested and then planted with crops that were only to be burned as biomass. That's a terrible option. But some other biomass energy sources include capturing methane from landfills and creating biofuels. So while I couldn't get a solid number on the carbon footprint of biomass, it's not great. What about land use? This really depends on how we're extracting it. I just did a full video about bioplastics that you can check out right here, in which we also talk about land use there. And it's a very similar story here, right? If we're clearing land to grow a crop just to burn it, that's not good. But if we're using waste product and byproduct and burning that, that's totally fine. What I'm talking about is like storm damage, right? A bunch of downed trees, downed branches, and the cleaning crew comes up and collects several dump trucks full of biomass. Burn that. That is a great option to turn that into fuel instead of sending it to the landfill. But deforesting an entire piece of land, Yeah, that's not good, and that's going to take a lot of land use. Science Direct has a great article here on how we can do biomass harvesting sustainably that is linked in the blog post. The cost is pretty low, I think, if I'm understanding these numbers correctly. The Department of Energy estimates that biomass heating plants have installed costs that typically average between $500 and $1,500 per kilowatt thermal of installed heating rate capacity. As for safety, because it's so similar to fossil fuels in terms of pollution, it's not good. It can still release CO2, particulate matter, lead to smog, and other respiratory issues. Of course, measures can be implemented like scrubbers to decrease this, but this is still something to consider. Harvard estimates that there is an increase of asthma, heart attacks, respiratory disease, birth defects, and neurodegeneration in areas that use primarily biomass energy, which is the same outcome as fossil fuels. While there isn't a whole lot of information out there about like recycling components once these facilities are at the end of their life, we do need to talk about recycling biomass itself. I'm talking about burning down trees, burning yard waste, burning food waste like corn husks. So again, not a whole lot of like evidence here as to what happens at the end of a life of a biomass plant, but that's what we got for now. And lastly is ecosystem impact. We already talked enough about emissions, so let's talk more about the broad environment here. When planting trees as a crop, this decimates the forest ecosystem. Oftentimes, only one species of tree is planted, which eliminates biodiversity among trees, which trickles down. This will decrease the biodiversity of mosses and shrubs and flowers, and therefore fungi, animals, insects, and more. And then when the trees are cut down, now this already limited forest environment is left with nothing remaining. Habitat is destroyed. Clear cutting also leads to decrease in soil health, water health, which impacts us, and can also lead to mudslides. It is now time to rank them. Let's compare them head to head using some handy charts, because these would do a much better job of explaining things than I would. And also, you know, scientists have already compiled the data and ranked these head to head, so I'm just going to use what the scientists have done because I am not an energy scientist. And as we go, I'm going to score them. In first place, you get 9 points, and in 9 points, you get 1 point. So then at the end, we can rank these several categories and add up their points to see the total scores. And we're going to throw in natural gas, coal, and oil to see how those fossil fuels compare to the green energy. And I've already done a full video on natural gas if you want to check it out right here, because as we will see by these charts, it is the best fossil fuel. That does not make it good. It is the best for a fossil fuel, making it the least bad option for a fossil fuel because all fossil fuels are bad. And you'll see how it compares to the green energy coming up. First is efficiency. The Wall Street Journal puts wind energy on top, but for this energy capacity, the DOE puts nuclear on top. Though the second chart does not contain biomass. For ranking purposes, I'm going to use the Wall Street Journal, which goes as follows: wind, geothermal, hydro, nuclear, solar, biomass, natural gas, oil, and coal. Next is carbon footprint. This chart ranks them as follows: wind, hydro, geothermal, solar, nuclear, biomass, natural gas, oil, and coal. As for land use, nuclear comes out on top on pretty much any study for lack of land use that it requires. Unfortunately, fossil fuels are not far behind. Other forms of green energy can be quite land intensive, so the ranking is as followed: nuclear, geothermal, coal, solar, natural gas, oil, hydro, wind, and biomass. It is by far the worst in this category. As for cost to build, wind energy wins, and solar is not too far behind. Oil does not appear in this chart, so maybe I'm cheating by putting it in last place, but I'm gonna put oil in last place because that's what it deserves. So the ranking for cost is as follows: wind, solar, natural gas, hydro, geothermal, coal, nuclear, biomass, and oil. And our last category that we are able to rank is safety. This chart is from Our World in Data, which accounts for accidents and pollution. Unfortunately, I could not find a single chart with geothermal on it, so to keep it consistent with the last category, I will be putting it in last place. They rank them as solar, nuclear, wind, hydro, biomass, natural gas, oil, coal, and geothermal. Recycling was just way too difficult to find for any sort of chart, so recycling will not be included in our ranking. And then ecosystem impact was also very hard to quantify because this really depends on which region it's in, what is the company doing, what is each team on the company doing. We're going to skip recycling and ecosystem impact and move on to the final scores. First, here's my prediction. I predict wind, nuclear, hydro, solar, geothermal, natural gas, oil, and coal. That's my prediction. Leave your prediction down below real quick because we're about to get into it right now. Wind gets 36 out of 45 points, and I feel like wind probably gets a pretty good boost from our unscored categories like recycling and ecosystem impact. Solar is not far behind at 34 out of 45 points, which puts nuclear in third place at 31 out of 45 points. Hydro is not far behind that at 30 out of 45 points. Geothermal is next in 29 out of 45 points, which, keep in mind, geothermal was automatically placed last in terms of safety just because of lack of information here, so it very well could outcompete hydro here. After that is natural gas at 22 out of 45 points. Next with biomass at 16 out of 45 points, pretty big gap there. Coal is next, just barely behind biomass at 15 out of 45 points, which is a really low score, but I was so surprised it outcompeted oil. And oil oil had a 12 out of 45 points. So as you can see, all three forms of fossil fuels and biomass are last because they all pollute so badly. Truly the only categories that fossil fuels take the cake in are land use and cost really just comes down to subsidies. If we funded and subsidized green energy, their costs would be lowered, but unfortunately our government loves to subsidize fossil fuels, and therefore it seems like it's cheaper even though it's actually not. So for now, enjoy one more chart about how much the world has invested this century in green energy and what those preferred sources of energy are. Now that we have learned everything we absolutely possibly could about green energy, actually just kidding, this is barely scraping the surface. What is your preferred method of green energy? Thanks for bearing with me, thanks for watching this video, especially if you made it all the way to the end, because somehow this was still only surface level. If you want a full video on any of these topics, let me know. I'm happy to make them. I'm personally very interested in comparing onshore versus offshore wind. I could maybe talk about how Trump is disincentivizing green energy. But for now, I have one more video that I recommend that you watch from me, and that is this video right here, busting green energy myths when it comes to stuff like energy efficiency, jobs, future of green energy, and things like that. Keep supporting green energy, keep supporting environmentalism. Thank you for learning. Please share this video with someone else who might find value in it, especially somebody who might be pro oil, pro coal. If you found any value in this video, please don't forget to like and comment on it because it does help support this video and get the message out there. And if you're new here and you like what you see, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I will see you in the next video, but until then, remember that your small actions make a big difference in the long run. Bye guys. A whole hour of filming as if this video needed to be longer. Here are my earrings, handmade by a friend. Bye. Yeah. What is wind? I don't know what I said. What am I saying? I'm not even hearing myself. Instead, they're going to place solar panels. Instead, they're going to place solar fields. Instead, they're going to place solar fields. No.